Hi, everybody, and welcome. And I am Dr. Karen, and it is my job to break down the best language therapy techniques around so that you can help your students succeed in school and in life. What I'm going to do today is walk through a question that I get a lot. And that question is, why do kids with language issues struggle so much with WH questions? Specifically, why do they struggle with why questions? That was a lot of whys right there. But what we end up doing if we have students who struggle with just answering any questions is that there's usually a goal on the IEP for WH questions. And how we handle that in therapy is that we just practice WH questions over and over again with our WH question flashcards. And the problem is that a lot of times we're just having the kid do the same thing over and over again that they can't do without really addressing the cause. So that's what I wanted to walk through today. Specifically, we're going to talk about why questions are so challenging. So I'm just going to share my screen really quickly. And we'll get started here. So one of the first things that we want to consider when we are thinking about any type of comprehension problem is what's causing it. There are a lot of things that we can do to practice helping our kids understand, but if we don't know the little pieces that are causing that processing breakdown, then we're not likely to see significant improvements. So one of the things that is a common problem for students who do have some diagnosed language disorder is what I like to call the comprehension killer. So based on a lot of the research out there, we have found that specifically complex sentences are very difficult for students with language disorders. They're hard to understand and they're hard to use. So that means if you are reading a text to a student that has a lot of complex sentences, they're likely to have a comprehension breakdown, and in their writing and in their oral language, they are less likely than other kids to actually use complex sentences correctly. So what does this have to do with why questions? Well, I'll tell you. It's because your first step when you are having to answer why is understanding causal conjunctions. One that comes up a lot is the word because. So because is a subordinate conjunction. It's also a causal conjunction. So that's a specific type of subordinate conjunction. So a subordinate conjunction is a word that connects a subordinate clause to an independent clause to form a complex sentences. And what it also does is that it explains the relationship between the two clauses. So what it does here is that it explains why. When we're using the word because, we're explaining why something happened. That's how it's explaining the relationship. And if your students don't understand what this word means and what it does, they're not going to be able to understand whatever it is that you're asking them about. So they're not getting the message going in because they're not processing that because is explaining a reason. And they also are not going to be able to produce it. So they're not going to be able to use that word correctly when they're answering your question. And we have to be able to do that and understand what this type of word means and what it does in order to be able to answer a why question. If we can't do that, we're not going to be able to put our thoughts together and answer the question. And what will happen is that they will pull whatever it is they can that they remember, and they'll give you an answer that might be kind of in the ballpark, but is not really what you asked them. So remember that when it comes to words like because, and specifically these types of conjunctions that explain relationships, is that it's not just about what the word means. When we talk about vocabulary, a lot of times we want to explain meanings, but we also have to understand functions. So it's not just about what these words mean, but it's also about what they do. our students have to understand those functions in order to be able to know how to use them. With the word because, if we think about what it actually does, number one, it explains a reason, and number two, it explains why. So your students have to understand the purpose for this word and how they're supposed to use it. If they can't understand that, they may not be able to explain why because they don't know what this word does. So how can we actually improve comprehension of causal conjunctions, and how can we actually help our students use them more effectively? Well, I'm going to give you two techniques today. One of them is called a directive question, and one of them is called a sentence starter. So let's talk about the first one. So first, we're going to talk about directive questions, and we're going to use this to improve comprehension of those complex sentences. So in order to be able to answer a why question about something that's happening, your students have to understand the message going in. So first, what you're going to do to work on this skill is present a complex sentence with the word because. So this could be, you could have them read it, you could have them just listen to you say it, you could say a word about a picture and have them be looking at the picture at the same time they're saying it. And I recommend starting with just one sentence at a time and then working up to doing this in paragraphs. But you want to present that sentence. An example here is, we went to bed early because we were tired. So this sentence is a complex sentence. We have our independent clause here, we went to bed early, and then we have our subordinate clause, because we were tired. So because is the subordinate conjunction that's explaining the relationship between the clauses here. So after you present the sentence, you ask a directive question. An example of that would be the question, why did we go to bed early? You're simply asking your student to explain something that you just told them. So you're asking them to answer a question about the message you just gave them in the sentence. So this way we're isolating this skill and we're working specifically on understanding of that type of sentence, and we're making sure that the appropriate conjunction is in that sentence. So we're really targeting that skill. What happens a lot of times when our students have comprehension issues is that we're just randomly asking them a bunch of questions about this huge paragraph, and we're not really isolating that skill. So this is making sure that it's really focused on the thing that is causing your students problems. So that's the first part that can help you address the comprehension issue. To help address the issue with expression, so first your students have to understand it, but then what if they're having a hard time getting the answer out? Maybe they don't know how to start their sentence. So in that case, we give them a sentence starter. And that's literally exactly how it sounds. You just start the sentence for them. So an example of that for this sentence would be, we went to bed early because, and then they'd finish the sentence. Or you could even just give them because and have them finish the sentence there. So all we're doing is just starting it for them and giving them a little bit help. And then we eventually want to fade that and give them less and less of a sentence starter over time. So we're using backward chaining there, where we gradually fade that away. Now, keep in mind here, the second example I gave you where we just start with the word because, when they answer the question, they might just say, because we were tired, which is technically not a complete sentence, but a lot of times it is appropriate conversationally to answer a question with something that's not a complete sentence. So keep in mind whether or not that would be appropriate there. If you want your students to say a complete sentence and be a little bit more formal, you're going to have to give them a little bit more instruction, but you want this to be something that would be appropriate in conversation and how you'd realistically expect your student to answer the question. So to wrap that up, we talked about directive questions. Let me go back to my slide here. We just talked about directive questions and sentence starters to improve comprehension of the causal conjunction because, and we're doing that because if your students don't understand how to use that type of word, specifically if they don't know how to use the word because, they're going to have a really hard time answering a why question. So that's a lot of times the culprit behind that issue with your students. So remember, it's not just about what the word means, it's also about what the word does. They have to understand the function, that it's used to explain why, it's used to explain a reason for something happening. So before we wrap this up, if you want more strategies for helping your students with language processing issues, so maybe you have those students who really struggle with comprehension and you're not really sure what's causing the issue, and if you want an additional resource that will guide you through strategies just like the one that I talked about in this video, click the link below to sign up for my free 36-page ebook called The Ultimate Guide to Sentence Structure. It walks through strategies that will help boost your students' language comprehension and expression. And you'll also be added to my email list so that you can get resources just like this one delivered to your inbox every week. So thanks again for watching, and click the link below the video to sign up for that free ebook.